Claire Ravenport, a struggling matron barely surviving on £24,000 a year, showed compassion to an elderly woman everyone ignored. But when that woman died, the next morning brought black cars, lawyers, and a duke. Because the patient Claire comforted wasn't just anyone. She was a duchess. And what she left behind would upend the British aristocracy.
Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
Southampton, early morning. Rain streaked down the windows of Riverside Care Home, smearing the gray light into soft, tired patterns. Inside, Claire Ravenport moved through the corridors like clockwork, measured, methodical, and already weary before the day had begun. At 38, she was both matron and mother, caretaker and survivor. £24,000 a year barely stretched across her life, and every shift felt like another borrowed breath. She tied her apron tightly, her fingers cracked from disinfectant, her shoulders stiff from double shifts. 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., then back again from 7 to 11 on alternating nights. It was the only way to stay ahead of rent, $1,100 each month for a flat that smelled faintly of damp, and the hospital bills still shadowing her from her husband David's cancer. 3 years since he'd passed, yet his debt remained like a ghost at the edge of every payslip. Her daughter Wenda, 14 and growing restless, had stopped asking for school trips or art supplies. "We'll save for it next month," Claire always said, though she knew there was never a next month that wasn't already spent. $280 short every single cycle. But she smiled through it. She'd promised David she would. In the memory of his final night, oxygen monitor blinking faintly beside their joined hands, she'd whispered, "I'll give her a better life, somehow." Down the hall, room 12 waited, the door no one else wanted to open. Dorothy Dearborn, age 89, advanced dementia, classified by administration as a charity case. Staff rotated quickly past her, 15 minutes, checklist, leave. Some called her the difficult one. Others said, "She doesn't even know you're there." But Claire came anyway, every single day. "Morning, Miss Dorothy," she said softly, pushing the cart of brushes and lotions inside. The room smelled faintly of lavender oil and loneliness. Dorothy sat by the window, eyes unfocused, hands twisting the edge of her blanket. Claire spoke as if to an old friend. "Shall we fix that beautiful hair of yours again?" She brushed it slowly, silver curls into careful 1960s waves like the old photographs on Dorothy's nightstand. Sometimes she read poetry aloud. Langston Hughes' Maya Angelou, her voice carrying gently across the sterile quiet. And when words felt too heavy, she sang softly, "His eye is on the sparrow." For brief, fragile moments, Dorothy's gaze would lift and she'd murmur, "Thank you, child." Her fingers, paper thin, would clutch Claire's hand as if anchoring herself in a world she no longer remembered. Other matrons laughed in the break room. "She spends hours in that room, waste of time." But Claire didn't mind. Some people needed to be seen, even if they couldn't see back. When the shift ended, she washed her hands, packed her things, and glanced once more at the closed door of room 12. Dorothy would be asleep soon. Alone again. Outside, the rain had stopped. Claire stepped into the chill evening and pulled her coat tighter. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet acts of kindness, the hair brushed, the songs sung, the prayers whispered, were about to rewrite not only her own story, but the story of an entire noble house. Days at Riverside Care Home followed the same weary rhythm. But for Claire Ravenport, the quiet moments in room 12 had become something sacred. Her double shifts no longer felt like endless repetition. They were bookended by the time she spent with Dorothy Dearborn, the forgotten woman everyone else avoided. It was no longer part of her duties. It was a calling. Every morning she carried her cleaning cart down the hall, its wheels creaking across the linoleum floors. "Good morning, Miss Dorothy," she would say softly, letting her voice fill the silence. Dorothy often sat near the window, lost in the drifting shapes of the world outside, her eyes fogged with memories no one else could see. Claire brushed her silver hair gently, talking as she worked. Do you remember these styles, she'd ask, shaping the curls into graceful 1960s waves, the same as the photographs on the nightstand, Dorothy laughing, elegant, head thrown back in youth and confidence. You must have been beautiful back then, Claire would murmur. Still are, you know. When the room grew too still, Claire read poetry aloud. Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou, verses of longing, resilience, and hope that somehow bridged the gap between them. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies, she read, her voice steady. Dorothy didn't respond, but her breathing softened, her hands unclenched. Sometimes Claire sang instead, a gentle hymn, His Eye is on the Sparrow. Her tone was low and pure, wrapping the room in warmth the radiator couldn't give. And then one evening something changed. The ward lights dimmed for the night, and most of the staff had gone home. Claire stayed behind, tidying Dorothy's bedside table, humming softly. Out of nowhere, Dorothy's frail hands shot forward, gripping Claire's wrist with surprising strength. Dorothy? Claire whispered, startled. The old woman's eyes were clear, sharper than they had been in months. They forgot me, Dorothy said hoarsely. Everyone forgot me. My family, my son. They left me here. Claire knelt beside his chair, heart pounding. You're not forgotten, Dorothy. I see you. Dorothy's gaze softened, her lip trembling. You have a good heart, she whispered, brushing Claire's cheek with trembling fingers. Don't let this world take that from you. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. I won't. Dorothy exhaled slowly, her grip loosening. Good child. That night, Dorothy slept peacefully, her face serene. The next morning, when Claire entered room 12, the air felt strangely still. The poetry book lay open on her lap, one hand resting gently on the page. Dorothy had passed in her sleep, a faint smile on her lips. Claire froze, the world narrowing to the small sound of her own heartbeat. Then she knelt, pressing her forehead to Dorothy's hand. Goodbye, Miss Dorothy, she whispered. Thank you for letting me see you. Later, while packing away Dorothy's belongings, Claire found faded photographs, elegant jewelry, and a bundle of old documents she couldn't quite understand. But she folded them carefully because dignity, even in death, was a promise she meant to keep. The morning after Dorothy's passing, Riverside Care Home was unusually tense. The staff whispered in clusters, the air thick with curiosity. Claire Ravenport, still hollow from grief, stood at the nurse's station signing reports when the care home director, Mr. Lewis, burst through the corridor, his face pale. Claire, he stammered, you need to come to reception immediately. She followed him down the hall, confused. As the automatic doors slid open, she froze. 3 sleek black cars lined the curb outside. Inside the lobby stood a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, posture rigid, eyes cold as winter glass. Behind him were 4 men in black coats, security, and an older gentleman with a leather briefcase clutched to his chest. Mr. Lewis, the tall man said coolly, is this the matron? Yes, Your Grace, the director replied, bowing slightly. This is Claire Ravenport. The man turned, his gaze slicing through the air. I'm Duke William Jacoby. My mother, Duchess Dorothy Dearborn of Finley, passed here yesterday, I believe. Claire's breath caught. Duchess? He nodded once, his expression unreadable. Yes, my mother preferred to keep her identity private. I assume that's why your staff didn't realize who she was. Claire's mind reeled. Dorothy, a duchess? The quiet, gentle woman she'd brushed and read poetry to? The forgotten soul in room 12 had been royalty? William's voice broke through her disbelief. You're to attend the will reading tomorrow, 2 o'clock sharp. Fardens and Associates, London. Be punctual. Claire blinked, uncertain she'd heard right. The will reading? Me? The Duke's tone sharpened. My mother's attorney insists on your presence. Whatever this is, we'll settle it properly. Mr. Lewis stepped forward awkwardly. Your Grace, if there's anything we can— Nothing, William interrupted. His gaze returned to Claire. I'll say this plainly. My mother was ill. Her mind wasn't sound. Whatever you think you're entitled to, you're not. The words landed like stones. He turned and strode out, security following in perfect formation. The glass doors shut behind them with a hiss, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. The nurses exchanged glances, whispering furiously, "Did he say Duchess? Her son's a duke? Claire, did you know?" Claire shook her head, her voice breaking. "I just knew she was lonely." That evening, after Wenda had gone to bed, Claire sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open. Her fingers trembled as she typed Duchess Dorothy Dearborn of Finley. Articles appeared instantly. Black and white photos of a stunning woman in pearls. Headlines about a scandal 40 years ago. Heiress marries Black American jazz musician. Family disowns her. Dorothy and James Jacoby. Their son. Their son William. Claire's eyes burned. The woman in those photos was unmistakable. Her Dorothy. She whispered to herself, "I cared for a duchess, and she died thinking everyone forgot her." Outside, the city hummed faintly, unaware that somewhere in a cramped Southampton flat, a matron's world had just tilted on its axis. Tomorrow, she would face nobility itself, and the truth waiting behind it. If you were in Claire's place, standing before a duke, realizing the lonely woman you cared for was royalty, what would you do next? Would you walk away or face the powerful family head-on? The next day, Claire Ravenport rode the train to London in uneasy silence, her hands clasped around a worn handbag. She'd borrowed her best dress, navy blue, neatly pressed, and polished the scuffed shoes she wore to work. Around her, commuters scrolled through phones and newspapers, unaware that a care home matron from Southampton was on her way to face a duke in a lawyer's office. Fardens and Associates stood like a marble monument to wealth. Tall glass, gold lettering, receptionist who didn't smile. When Claire gave her name, the assistant's brows rose faintly, as if doubting she belonged there. "Please wait, they're expecting you." Inside the conference room, the air was thick with polished silence. Duke William Jacoby lounged in a leather chair, legs crossed, his expression carved from stone. Beside him sat his attorney, Nigel Fardens, silver-haired and precise. Claire hesitated by the door until Fardens gestured. "Please, Miss Ravenport, sit." Her knees nearly buckled as she took a seat. Fardens cleared his throat. "This reading concerns the last will and testament of Duchess Dorothy Dearborn of Finley, executed 3 months ago under medical supervision." William gave a short laugh. Supervision. She barely knew what year it was. Fardens ignored him and began, "To my son, William Jacoby, I leave the title of Duke of Finley and the Johnson estate, on condition it remain intact as a heritage property, and that tenant families retain their home." William nodded stiffly, expected. Fardens continued, his tone unchanged. "To Miss Claire Ravenport, matron at Riverside Care Home, who treated a forgotten old woman with dignity when my own blood could not, I leave the following: £750,000 in cash, the deed to Rosemary Cottage in Bourton-on-the-Water, and guardianship of the Dearborn Legacy Trust, presently valued at £12 million. The room stopped breathing. Claire's eyes widened. "There must be a mistake." William surged from his chair. "This is absurd. She had dementia. This can't stand." Fardens lifted a folder. "The Duchess was declared legally competent by 2 psychiatrists. The will is valid and binding." He slid the folder toward Claire. "These are the trust documents. As director, you hold voting rights on the Finley Estate Board." William's face turned scarlet. "You manipulated her. You preyed on her confusion." Claire found her voice, trembling but clear. "I cared for your mother when no one else did. I didn't even know who she was." Fardens added quietly, "There is also a sealed letter addressed to you, Miss Ravenport, her personal message." He handed her a cream envelope marked with an elegant D in wax. William slammed his palm on the table. "You'll regret this. I'll fight you in every court in England." He stormed out, his entourage following like dark wings behind him. Left alone, Claire stared at the envelope in her shaking hands. Her entire world, poverty, grief, routine, had just cracked open. She whispered, "Dorothy, what did you do?" and clutched the letter to her chest as if it might steady the ground beneath her feet. That night, the city felt quieter than usual. Claire Ravenport sat at her small kitchen table, the single lamp throwing soft light across the sealed envelope. Her name was written in shaky but elegant cursive. Miss Claire Ravenport. The red wax seal bore the same emblem she'd seen on the trust folder, a crown D surrounded by laurel leaves. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. Inside was a handwritten letter, pages folded carefully, the ink slightly smudged in places. Claire unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then I've gone to join my beloved James. You didn't know I was a Duchess, did you? I never told you because, for the first time in decades, someone saw me as just Dorothy. Not a title, not a scandal, not a burden." Claire's eyes stung as she read on. "My family disowned me when I married James, a black American jazz musician, 43 years ago. They said I disgraced the family name. When he died 20 years later, I tried to reconcile with my son William, but by then his heart had grown cold. He put me in that care home and never visited. Not once. For 9 months I sat alone until you walked in." Tears blurred the words. Claire's chest ached as she read the next line. "You brushed my hair when it was tangled. You read poetry when I couldn't remember my own name. You sang the songs James once played on his saxophone. You gave me back my dignity. Now I must ask you for one last kindness." The letter grew darker. "William plans to sell Finley Estate to an American developer named Jeremiah Clark for £85 million. If he succeeds, 400 tenant families will lose their homes, and a 400-year-old heritage will be destroyed. I've given you the trust, the board seat, and the evidence to stop him." Claire looked to the second page. Attached were photocopies of emails, bank statements, and signed contracts. William's name scattered across every page. There it was in writing. Sale of Finley Estate. Clause. Demolition of tenant cottages. Redevelopment for luxury condominiums. Her heart sank. Dorothy had known. She had planned this carefully, not out of spite, but out of faith. "Nobility isn't about bloodlines, it's about how we treat the powerless. You showed me more nobility in 9 months than my son has shown in 42 years. Use what I've given you. Protect what matters." At the bottom of the letter, the final words were underlined twice. "Don't let him win. With all my love, Dorothy." Claire lowered the letter slowly, tears dripping onto the page. The weight of £12 million, a duke's wrath, and a dying woman's trust pressed on her shoulders all at once. From the next room, Wenda's sleepy voice broke the silence. "Mom, are you okay?" Claire wiped her eyes. "I'm fine, love. I just have something important to do." She looked back at Dorothy's letter and whispered, "I have to fight a duke." For 3 nights, Claire Ravenport hardly slept. Dorothy's letter sat beside her bed like a promise she couldn't ignore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the lines written in shaky ink. Don't let him win. By dawn, she made her decision. She would fight for Dorothy's legacy, no matter what it cost. At Riverside Care Home, the gossip about the will had reached fever pitch. Nurses whispered when Claire passed. Some congratulated her. Others stared with envy or disbelief. Mr. Lewis, the director, called her into his office. "Claire, you've been good to us," he began cautiously. "But this attention, reporters are calling, donors are nervous. Maybe you should take a leave of absence." Claire nodded quietly. "I understand." That afternoon, she handed in her badge. Leaving the care home felt like shedding an old skin, painful but necessary. Outside, the wind whipped her hair across her face as if urging her forward. She took the train back to London, heart pounding, clutching Dorothy's trust papers in her lap. The board meeting of the Finley Estate Trust was being held that same week at the Duke's headquarters, an elegant Georgian building overlooking Hyde Park. The letter from Fardens had confirmed her seat as acting trustee director. Claire arrived early, her nerves nearly breaking her. Inside, the polished wood table stretched endlessly. filled with people who looked like they'd never worked a day in a care home. William Jacoby sat at the head of the table, every inch the aristocrat. He didn't even glance her way. "Let's proceed," he said curtly. "We're here to approve the sale of Finley Estate to Clark Holdings." The chairman, Lord Havers, nodded. "And Miss Ravenport, as newly appointed trustee, you have a vote, though I assume you'll follow the Duke's recommendation?" Claire rose to her feet, clutching Dorothy's folder. "No," she said firmly, "I won't." All eyes turned to her. She spread the documents across the table. Bank transfers, signed agreements, private memos. "This sale isn't preservation, it's destruction. Hundreds of tenant families will lose their homes. Dorothy trusted me to stop it, and now you all know why." William's jaw tightened. "You have no right to interfere in family business." "This isn't about family," Claire shot back. "It's about decency." The room buzzed with murmurs. Lord Havers flipped through the papers, his brows knitting. "Is this true, Your Grace?" William's silence spoke volumes. Claire continued, voice trembling, but steady. "Dorothy's last wish was for her estate to remain a refuge, not a profit. You may have her title, but she left me her conscience." By the time she finished, the decision was clear. The board voted against the sale. William's face drained of color as his power crumbled in front of everyone. Claire gathered her papers, her heart thundering. As she left, the city sunlight caught her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving. She was fighting for something bigger. If you've ever believed that ordinary people can stand up to power, don't miss what happens next in Claire's journey. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us, because the story after this one will remind you how courage can change everything. The headlines came first. By morning, every major newspaper carried the same story. Duke's estate sale blocked by care home worker turned trustee. The photo accompanying it showed Claire Ravenport leaving the Finley Trust building, sunlight catching her face, Dorothy's folder clutched tightly in her arms. The nation wanted to know how a simple matron from Southampton had faced down nobility and won. But victory was never simple. The following week brought a storm of scrutiny. Paparazzi camped outside her small flat. Reporters knocked on doors of her neighbors. Wenda came home from school pale and anxious. "Mom, everyone's talking about us," she whispered. "They say you're rich now. Is that true?" Claire smiled faintly. "We're not rich, love. We're responsible." Inside, she wasn't smiling at all. The Dearborn Legacy Trust had been frozen pending investigation. Legal letters from William Jacoby's solicitors arrived daily, thinly veiled threats of defamation and appeals. She refused to be intimidated. With Fardin's help, she gathered every document Dorothy had left, building her defense carefully. 2 weeks later, the court hearing began. It wasn't grand or televised, just a quiet, wood-paneled courtroom filled with tension. William sat across from her, immaculate as always, his cold gaze unwavering. His barrister argued that the Duchess had been mentally unfit, that Claire had exploited her kindness. When her turn came, Claire stood and spoke softly but clearly. "I didn't know she was a Duchess. I only knew she was lonely. I brushed her hair, read to her, sang for her. If love is exploitation, then I'm guilty." The room fell silent. Fardins handed the judge the medical reports confirming Dorothy's mental competence at the time of signing. Then came the decisive evidence. The letter. Dorothy's handwriting, steady and unmistakable, expressing gratitude and trust. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was solemn but firm. "This court finds the will of Duchess Dorothy Dearborn of Finley valid. The Dearborn Legacy Trust remains under the guardianship of Miss Claire Ravenport." A quiet gasp swept through the courtroom. William sat motionless, jaw clenched, while Claire closed her eyes, relief and sorrow washing over her together. It wasn't triumph, it was peace. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but Claire didn't stop. She walked straight past them, the autumn wind catching her coat. Fardins followed behind her. "Miss Ravenport," he said gently, "you've done more than defend a legacy. You've reminded this country what integrity looks like." She smiled faintly. It wasn't me, it was Dorothy. That night at home, she tucked Wenda into bed. Mom, her daughter murmured sleepily, does this mean we can finally rest? Claire brushed her hair back. It means we can start over. After Wenda drifted off, Claire sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The moonlight reflected in her eyes as she whispered, you kept your promise, Dorothy. I won't let it die. Somewhere, she hoped, the old Duchess was smiling too, her music playing again in a world that finally remembered her name. A full year passed before the world settled again. The scandal had faded from the headlines and the name Claire Ravenport no longer appeared in tabloids. Instead, it began to appear on something better: charity plaques, grant announcements, and scholarship letters. The Dearborn Legacy Trust, once a sleeping fund, now pulsed with life. Under Claire's stewardship, it was transformed into a foundation dedicated to preserving heritage homes and supporting elderly care. The first project she funded was a complete renovation of Riverside Care Home. New beds, new staff training, and a new wing named the Dorothy Suite. A plaque at its entrance read, "For those who deserve to be seen." The first day she walked through the finished ward, the air smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent she had once brought for Dorothy. The nurses greeted her warmly, no longer with gossip or pity, but with pride. "You've changed everything here, Claire," Mr. Lewis said quietly. "You've given people hope." She smiled, touching the plaque with her fingertips. "Dorothy gave it to us. I just passed it along." At home, life had become gentler. Wenda was thriving in her new school, taking art classes on weekends. For the first time, there were no bills stacked on the kitchen counter, no anxiety waiting in the post. Instead, there were framed photos of smiles. Dorothy's portrait beside one of Claire and Wenda, both beaming under the spring sunlight. Sometimes Claire would visit Rosemary Cottage in Burton-on-the-Water, the small home Dorothy had left her. The cottage stood at the edge of a quiet stream, surrounded by lilacs and ivy. It was peaceful, untouched, and exactly the kind of place where healing found room to grow. There she wrote letters to donors, drafted project proposals, and read poetry again, just as she had in room 12. But even peace had its bittersweet edges. One evening, as she sat in the cottage garden, Fardens came to visit. "There's something you should know," he said. "The Duke has resigned from the board. He's leaving England for a while." Claire looked toward the horizon, the fading sun painting the fields in gold. "He's not my enemy," she said softly. "He's just a man who forgot what mattered." Fardens nodded. "Perhaps one day he'll remember." When he left, Claire stood quietly among the lilacs, the letter from Dorothy still tucked in her journal. She had read it 100 times, yet the words still steadied her. Nobility isn't about bloodlines. It's about how we treat the powerless. That night, as the cottage lights glowed warmly across the water, Claire realized something profound. She had inherited not a fortune, but a responsibility to carry forward a legacy built not on titles, but on compassion. She looked toward the stars and whispered, "You're still with me, Dorothy, and I'll keep seeing them, all the ones the world forgets." The night breeze rustled the trees as if in reply, and somewhere in that quiet countryside, the legacy of kindness continued to breathe. The seasons turned once more, bringing spring rain and quiet renewal. The city of Southampton was brighter now, its streets softened by time and memory. Claire Ravenport returned to Riverside Care Home one breezy morning, no longer as an employee, but as a benefactor. Her heels clicked softly down the familiar corridor, past the same pastel wall she had once scrubbed clean during endless double shifts. Room 12 was different, freshly painted, new curtains fluttered at the window, sunlight spilling across crisp linen. Yet something of the past still lingered, the scent of lavender, faint and comforting. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph of Dorothy Dearborn in her youth, smiling radiantly. Claire stood there for a long moment, remembering the trembling hands that once gripped hers, the faint voice whispering, "Don't let the world take your kindness." A nurse entered quietly. "Mrs. Ravenport, thank you for everything you've done for the home. The residents talk about you like your family." Claire smiled, brushing her hand along the edge of the bed. "Family isn't always blood," she said softly. Sometimes it's the people we're meant to care for. Before leaving, she stopped at the reception desk where a new nameplate gleamed. The Dorothy Dearborn Wing. Dignity, care, legacy. The sight filled her with a quiet, humbling pride. Outside, Wenda waited by the car, holding a stack of sketchbooks. "Mom," she called, "can we stop by the cottage after? I want to paint the garden again." Claire smiled. "Of course, love. Dorothy would have liked that." They drove through the countryside, past rolling fields and clusters of wild flowers swaying in the breeze. The radio played softly, an old jazz melody, familiar and warm. Claire glanced at Wenda in the mirror, humming along absent-mindedly. For the first time in years, her life wasn't ruled by exhaustion or survival. It was filled with purpose. Dorothy's inheritance had not only changed her circumstances, it had restored her faith that compassion could ripple across generations. When they arrived at Rosemary Cottage, Claire unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was filled with the comforting scent of wood and lilac. On the writing desk by the window sat the old poetry book she once read to Dorothy. She opened it to a bookmark page and read aloud, her voice steady, almost musical. "I'm still here in the wind, in the light, in the kindness you give. Legacy is not what we leave behind, but who we lift while we're living." Tears glistened at the corner of her eyes, but they were not of grief. They were gratitude, pure, grounding, and real. As dusk settled outside, she placed a small bouquet of wildflowers by the window. "You were never forgotten, Dorothy," she whispered. "You just needed to be seen." The last light faded, leaving the room aglow with quiet peace. Claire closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat, she could almost hear Dorothy's gentle laugh carried on the breeze. If Claire and Dorothy's story touched your heart, remember, acts of kindness echo farther than we see. Subscribe now so you won't miss the next story of compassion, courage, and redemption still to come.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!